Is there more willingness among companies to pay for sustainability?
In order to truly make a difference, companies have to start thinking about how can they compete on sustainability. There's a lot of data being produced, right? But companies are not even scratching the surface in their manufacturing process. They were using SF6, and this SF6 is about 3,000 times more potent in terms of emission impact than something like CO2.
Hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of the AIM Media House podcast Simulated Reality. Today we have with us Mukund Raghunath. He is the CEO and founder of Acies Global. Hi Mukund, how are you doing today?
Doing very well, Kashyap. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. Thank you so much for asking. When I reached out to your team, they wanted you to talk about reducing carbon footprint. I was a little taken aback. I was like, are we doing an AI podcast or not? I want to really understand a little bit what was the thought process behind speaking about sustainability, especially from the AI
Fair enough.
perspective.
So, a little bit about ACs. So, we are a digital transformation solutions company, right? And what that means for me is bringing together technology and data science to address, any problems in the, in the business or in the environment, right? And that includes sustainability for all the, right or wrong reasons is a hot topic now,
Yeah.
right? And seen the speed of adverse climate events even in the last couple of weeks, right? And I think sustainability is all about striking a balance between today's needs and how do you preserve some of the natural resources for our future generations, right? And I think data and technology can play a huge role in helping there, right? And our passion for sustainability stems, from the fact that we can make a material difference. There's a lot of data being produced, right? But companies are not even scratching the surface in terms of what can be done in this space. And if you look at sustainability, today a lot of the initiatives around sustainability still, are coming from the lens of corporate social responsibility or compliance, checking the box and making sure that regulatory reporting is done and so on and so forth. I think in order to truly make a difference, companies have to start thinking about how can they compete on sustainability, just like how companies compete with each other on price or quality of their products and branding and whatnot. I think sustainability is a key cornerstone through which they can compete, right? And that is not happening today. And if that happens, I think the progress towards a greener planet will be much faster. And I think we can enable that using data and AI and technology. And I think that's where our vision for sustainability is.
Can you share some ideas and use cases that you have worked on using data science for?
Sure. We'll talk about a few, right? One, we work for a lab manufacturing company, right? So the lab manufacturer focused on, biotechnology and pharma. They manufacture the labs. They put the labs together. And for them, one, they wanted to understand what their footprint of, all the greenhouse gas emissions are. And they wanted to figure out. So if you know a little bit about sustainability, there's scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions that companies measure and report on. Scope 1 and scope 2 are mandatory. Scope 3 is still not mandatory, right? And scope 1 refers to things that the companies, the way you can think about it, things that the companies burn within their, the direct emission from whatever they burn in the process of running their business, right? So the second is scope 2 is indirect emissions from everything that you buy. You buy, electricity, you buy gas, you buy heat. All of that falls under scope 2. Scope 3 is everything that's outside of these two, and that's vast, right? So there's about 15 different categories in which supposed to report on scope 3 emissions. And then that's a lot of data that is not easily available. So companies are still not reporting a whole lot on that. So, but what we helped this lab manufacturer do is figure out their scope 1 and scope 2, and to a certain degree scope 3 emissions, and help them in that process. And one of the interesting things that we found was, so carbon dioxide is the, is the number one, the CO2 emissions is the number one thing that companies measure, right? Here they were using in one of their processes, in their manufacturing process, they were using SF6, which is sulfur hexafluoride, right? And they were using a very small quantity of that. So it was about, they were only purchasing about 15 kilograms per year or something like that. So that it got missed in the grand scheme of things. When you're reporting, you're doing the 80-20 rule. So you're looking at where 80% of your cost is being spent in purchasing raw materials, and what your emissions are, and so on and so forth. And this SF6 is about 3,000 times more potent in terms of emission impact than something like CO2, right? And because it was a small quantity, it was flying under the radar. The biggest aha moment was figuring out something that's this small from an expense perspective, but very big from an emissions impact perspective, right? So that's one use case. The second is very interesting from a different perspective. What companies struggle with today is who's paying for all the sustainability investment.
I was going to ask you, is there more
paying?
willingness among companies to pay for sustainability, or is it incentivized through some of the...
No, most of it is, either, like I said earlier, either because it's a corporate social responsibility initiative, or because it's a compliance requirement, right? So in this case, we work with a packaging, company, right? And they do packaging for pharma, they do packaging for any food and beverage company, and so on and so forth, right? And their question was, okay, I'm investing in all the sustainable packaging. How do I articulate the value that I'm delivering to my value system, to my downstream customers in the supply chain, that allows me to say that, okay, if I'm investing this much, I need to get something back, right? How do you change the game from being doing this for check marks and compliance reasons to actually competing on sustainability? So we put a solution together that helps companies to have a dialogue with customers and other partners in their value chain to say, if I'm investing this much, this is how much I'm saving you from a sustainability perspective, because I can save on your reusability costs, I can save on how much you can recycle, right? And that's where data science and everything comes into play. And how do you articulate the value of your sustainability efforts, and how do you pass that on to your value chain so that you are more incentivized? Like your question is, your incentives, if your incentive is compliance, it's gonna only go that far, right? But if you're actually starting to compete on what do middle management get measured on? They get measured on how you optimizing costs, how you maximizing profitability.
Make money or save money?
Save money or make money. Maximize profitability or optimize cost. So it's got to come back to that. So how do you explain sustainability benefits in dollar terms? It's a huge gap that's there today, and that's what we're looking to solve.
Correct. And that was my question. Not just the willingness to do it. The other question is the possibility of doing it. There must be a different set of challenges in terms of implementing data science solutions for sustainability within organizations, right? Even when it comes to solving a lot of problem statements, people are talking about AI strategies. Even Sridhar Ramaswamy or everybody's talking about data strategy. Is your data strategy right first, right? So the availability of data is very fundamental to the entire AI strategy thing, right? And that is something all of these companies are focusing on. And given that the collection for data around this, let's say this packaging example that you gave, how good is let's say you have some manufacturing client or this thing, how is the data collection to kind of solve these problems And what are some of the other sets of challenges that you face when
Yeah,
trying
good
to solve?
good question. I think so I explained a little bit about scope one, scope two, and scope three. Scope one is everything that's happening and scope two is things that happen within your boundaries, the company's boundaries. Scope three is things that happen outside of the scope, company's boundaries. Things you buy, right? Raw material you're buying, right? Or services that you purchase, commute, employee commute, and transportation of your goods, and how do you dispose of the goods at the end of the life? All of that. There, the data exists, right, in some part of the ecosystem. The problem is not whether the data exists or not, because you have tons of smart meters, sensors, IoT devices, everything is there today. But the problem is, how do you get the data together? There is no, you need almost like an exchange,
Yeah.
right? And the idea of an exchange to be able to get that data to the right people at the right point of time. And how do you trust that data, right? How do you know if somebody is saying, okay, my emissions are this much? How do you trust that? Those are some of the challenges that still exist, right? And scope three, especially, I mean, a lot of companies are trying to figure out how to measure and report on scope three a lot more. And that's the reason, the UN protocol has not made it mandatory yet, because they understand the challenges with being able to report on this.
So that's sort of a framework to kind of start measuring the carbon footprint of the
Correct.
company, right?
Correct.
And putting the data sets together, trying to see the fundamentals
Correct.
of within the company. But that's very interesting. Now, another question that I have for you is, we're talking about data science to cut carbon footprint, but AI and data science in general is also emitting a lot of
Absolutely.
carbon, right? And it's a very, what is that problem called? It's a very ironical problem. And I think people are struggling with it, especially with these large language models. You need huge data centers to process your and huge processing powers. What are you, I don't know the right question to ask here, but what is
So
your,
how, I mean,
what is-
so in a different way, you're asking, when you're trying to solve the problem, are you creating more?
Yeah, that is probably the best way to put it.
Right. No, I think there's always this consideration with the compute power has increased so much, but it's also adding, all this, computations are also adding to the carbon footprint, right? Because you're burning, everything, right? So I don't think there's an easy answer to that, but I think being watchful of where, so every AI solution doesn't deserve to become full scale.
Yeah. So
Right.
picking your use cases.
Right, and also I think that you have to look at how do you write the code more optimally, right? How do you optimize your resources in doing that? I think that has to be measured, and that also has to be penalized and that has to be taken into consideration when you're looking at your footprint as well.
Yeah. Should companies have an AI tax?
I think at some point of time they will. So carbon tax is reality, right? At that point of time. So, and that's where the whole carbon credit trading also going on.
No, I think sometimes also, when it comes to the carbon emissions and footprint, from my understanding, when it comes to really, really large language models and that kind of data systems, then you're probably pulling it. But data solutions where you're using querying to build some regression models or some of these traditional AI, as they call it today, models. I think to save more energy is probably the cost is the impact is much better than the cost.
Correct.
Probably. So,
Correct. And I think you have to keep revisiting your cost benefit analysis on what you're using those models for and what it's paying off.
Looking ahead, what are some of the more innovative emerging solutions that you're looking at to solving? Your company focuses on this a lot, right? So over a period of time, when a company focuses on a particular area, they are always building state of the art.
We're still early in the journey, Kashyap, in this case. We've been thinking about it for the last year and a half or two, right? But obviously, there's some technology.
But overall, what are some?
But there are some technologies that have attracted our attention and want to look at, right? One is the whole concept of digital twins, right? So which is nothing but a virtual replica of your physical infrastructure and your plant or whatever it is, right? So and there the advantage is if you're able to simulate a digital twin to some degree of accuracy, you can look at different processes you're trying for more efficiency and whatnot, and understand the impact on the virtual world, right? Before you actually invest both cost and it's also going to result in more emissions if you go and experiment in the real world, right? So that is something that we are looking at very closely, right? And obviously Gen AI is the possibilities are there, are limitless. Where Gen AI in my mind can play a big role is what we talked about earlier. The data is there, but the data is there all over the place. There's no organized way in which people can easily exchange data, because somebody's scope 1 is somebody else's scope 2 and somebody else's scope 3, right?
Correct.
And so the data resides somewhere, but there's no exchange of information that is easy. So I think where Gen AI's strength is in being able to connect dots that you thought were hard to connect earlier, right? And want to look at possibilities of what we can enable using Gen AI in that regard as well, right? So those are some of the things that we are thinking of right now. Obviously, blockchain technology is also can also play a part, especially if I talk about something like a data exchange, right? Then blockchain is can play a big role there.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about, right, at the very start when it comes to especially data science and sustainability is the incentivization, right? And probably for large enterprises over the years we have observed that sometimes there is a lack of motivation around that, right? And rightly so. Everybody's KRAs are dependent on money you make or money
Correct.
costs you cut, which is fair enough, right? And probably incentivization can help to an extent. How do you envision imbibing this into the culture of organizations, right? And taking a data driven approach for the same, and at the same time, what is the role of different stakeholders in the ecosystem for the same, not just enterprises and vendors, but other stakeholders like government, education and all.
So if you look at, I'll compare it to something like diversity, right? There are incentives today, and there are mandates also today saying, there should be this amount of diversity in how you look at your suppliers and vendors and so on and so forth. Similarly, if you have sustainability as a line item, right, then companies are incentivized to say, I can really compete on sustainability. My product is more sustainable and I'm able to show that to the ecosystem in which I operate. My chances of winning, business, right, and my product being able to compete in the market is higher, right? And if that is able to be translated into goals for I think today sustainability is largely still a CSO initiative, right? A Chief Sustainability Officer initiative. It has to be something that can be measured at your, operational management, middle management.
So, in turn, a data driven approach will incentivize them.
Yeah. Right. And your goals are set using that, and your goals meaning not your soft goals, but even your cost or revenue goals and profit goals
directly
can be tied to, and that is something that is still nebulous today. It's not easy to convert your sustainability efforts into dollar terms, but that's where data can help. Right, and data science can help.
And I think this change needs to be driven by some people who are passionate about sustainability. Right? It is not an overnight thing where suddenly everybody is carbon conscious about their.
A lot of companies are already on their way, right? I mean, there's Apple and Microsoft made big claims and working towards it too.
Right? But some of the companies who are probably transitioning it into it, right? What is your advice in terms of taking the first step or taking the next step? And what do you?
Yeah, I think the first step in my mind is will be a mindset shift where you stop looking at sustainability as a check mark and look at it as a competitive advantage, or how you can enable that, because I think the regulations are going to get even more stringent, right? And if you continue to look at it only from the regulation angle and say, what do I need to do to get it done with, right? Your competitive advantage in the market is going to go down. The people who are going to flourish are the people who have the mindset that says that I'm going to turn this into in a way in which I do business and compete better, right? So this will affect my cost, will affect my prices, will affect my margin, will affect my marketing, a strategy in how I want to market myself. If I start measuring suppliers, right, my suppliers, right, and they start measuring their suppliers, then the whole ecosystem is, tuned to think this way, because we're going to lose business because your competitor is more sustainable than you. Then you'll do whatever it takes.
Got it. Fantastic. On that note, Mukund, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kashyap. It was wonderful interacting with you.
Yeah.
Thanks.